Thank you for joining For Our Special Kids, where we openly and honestly discuss the magic and the mess of raising a child with special needs. We are thrilled to have you here and hope this time provides you with some wonder and wisdom. I'm your host, Jennifer Lansing. Let's get started.
Hello, everyone. A quick note before we jump into today's episode. I want you to know how much I appreciate you and your loyalty to the podcast. If you could take a minute to rate and review For Our Special Kids on your listening platform, it'll really help other parents and caregivers, or just information seekers, find us. And as you may not know, I don't do any marketing for the podcast, and I also don't make any money. So your support in liking and reviewing us is a huge step in the right direction. Thank you. Thank you. All right, on to this week. In today's episode, we really dig into what Katheryn coins the new ABA. We've done other episodes with Stephen Forth on ABA, but I'm really excited to say that we're focusing today on children with special needs because that's her expertise. We discuss how all behavior is a form of communication and how most behaviors fall into one of the EATS, E-A-T-S categories that she reviews with us. It's a great conversation. I hope you enjoy. And as always, let me know what you think.
I am with Katheryn Berman today. Very excited to talk about a new approach to ABA. So Katheryn, thank you so much for being here. Before we start, let me go ahead and read your bio and then we'll jump right in. Sound good?
Sounds great.
Okay. So Katheryn Berman, MS, is a Navy veteran turned behavioral therapist for special needs children and families. She's been practicing applied behavioral analysis, or ABA therapy, for over 2 years and is currently pursuing national licensure as a behavioral analyst. She loves her job and is taking active steps to ensure that her therapy is neuro-affirming and trauma-informed. Katheryn, I'm really excited to start this conversation with you because as we've talked over email, we've had Stephen Forth come on and he talked about ABA and it was wonderful and I love him and he's an incredible person. However, we didn't really take it a step further into having a very specialized conversation about children with special needs or disabilities. So very excited to get into a lot of specifics, examples, and different experiences that you've had to really help our listeners determine if this is something that's right for them. So you talk about the new ABA. We all have talked in the past that ABA is controversial. It can be, or it was, I think, originally created to be more of kind of like a reward and punishment system, which was somewhat yucky. And so we've seen a we've seen a shift now in how people are approaching applied behavioral therapies. So will you talk with me about what your definition of new ABA is and how you got into it?
You are quite right. There are a lot of things in the history of ABA that are yucky, to put it mildly. There used to be a lot of punitive measures used, a lot more focus on punishment. Luckily, with the establishment of our ethical code, we really don't use it that much anymore. There's a major push to use reinforcement like praise and try using all those kind of systems before we even consider anything that might be considered punishment. For me personally, I use the phrase new ABA as an umbrella term because there are a lot of sub-movements in the field right now. There is neuro-affirming care. There is trauma-informed care. There's compassionate ABA, ascent-based practices. To avoid just having to go through all that every single time when I talk about the kind of therapy that I want to do, I just use new ABA. But there's no like formal guideline. That's not a formal discipline or anything. If you look it up, it's just ABA with these different approaches integrated into it.
I know Teal's teacher at school actually has a lot of background in this. It is very much about choice and desire and positive reinforcement, like what you're talking about. So I'm really happy about it. I love that you're taking a different approach and that you're really specifically focusing on children with special needs. So is there anyone that pops into your mind that has really been a powerful influence for you in how you've structured your therapy with children?
One client that I worked with earlier in my career was actually the client that inspired me to look into trauma-informed care, just because of some events in their history that I won't go into, but it made me want to be better for them regarding their particular situation.
So when you say trauma informed, what can you give some examples of what that is?
Sure. A common phrase that you'll hear in trauma-informed care is if you see a behavior that is unexpected or that some might label challenging. A lot of old approaches might ask the question, what's wrong with that person or child? A trauma-informed approach asks what happened to that person or child.
Oh, fascinating. So I like that because it is.
I do too.
Yeah, it's why you do it.
Yes.
So yeah, I mean, that's actually really huge. And I do think it, even just until 10 years ago or so, or even currently now with some people, it is like, what's wrong with them? Why are they doing that? Not what's the behavior that led to this type of response or reaction. Can you give us an example of what that might be and then how you might work with the child in that setting?
So I'm thinking of the client that really motivated my interest in trauma-informed care. One of the behaviors that the client's caregivers wanted me to address was falling to the ground.
Mm.
In a home setting, the floors are hardwood. Normally, in a behavioral science approach, we look at the function of behavior. There's 4 main functions, and you tailor your intervention based on which function is at play.
What are those for? Just to remind the listeners, because I know we talked about it with Stephen, but yeah, if you wouldn't mind giving us those 4 functions, that'd be great.
Absolutely. You can use the acronym Everybody Eats to remember them. That's how I remember them.
Okay.
So E is escape or avoiding something. A is for attention. And that doesn't mean just praise. It could be any interaction with the person or child.
Mm-hmm.
Tangible. So food, water, something physical. And sensory. It feels good.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so EATS.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So those are the 4 functions of behavior. And you were saying, so the child was falling to the ground, and in that setting, it's hard floor, it hurts. So talk me through the rest of that.
I still tried to determine what the function was, but I brought in a component of trauma-informed care, which led me to ask the question, what other circumstances or contexts might have been at play when this behavior first started? Trauma really looks at a person's history and views any behavior as a form of communication and a form of adapting. When I knew more about that client's history, which, again, for privacy reasons, I won't go into, it really made me understand how that behavior could have been adaptive in the situations where it first appeared.
Obviously, you're not going to give names or anything like that, but is there a way for us to have some context to it? So, I mean, I'm thinking, okay, I'm not a therapist. So a child is falling to the floor. And what you realized is there was some trauma that happened before that caused the behaviors of falling to the floor.
Yes. To speak in generalities, this client had experienced, neglect almost certainly, overcrowding almost certainly, poor living conditions. Yeah, it's hard for me to even think about.
So you dug deeper with this child to then say, okay, maybe we can look at those behaviors and apply other types of therapy to this situation. So did you do like talk therapy then? Did you do play therapy? Do you do like, how then do you move that child from the traumatic experience and the response to moving out of the falling to the floor?
And I think it's important to clarify, I'm not a licensed therapist, so I can't do talk therapy. Okay. Everything that I do is still delivered under the ABA umbrella.
Okay.
This particular intervention, though, was just trauma informed.
Okay.
Because I went back into the history and thought about what happened to this client. So the first step to this intervention that I used was realizing that if this behavior emerged in a setting was traumatic for the child, probably a good idea is to remind them now that they are safe.
Mm-hmm.
They are safe. They have a warm place to call. They have caregivers who really care about them. I wasn't going anywhere. I was there to help them regulate. That was my first priority, was just trying to establish a sense of safety.
And I would imagine that's pretty important for any child. But then when you take it a step further, a child with special needs, that is really important.
With the history that they had, I wanted to be someone that they considered safe to interact with.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't want to add more to their life. They've been through enough.
So what other types of children, or, and I don't like labels, but diagnoses are you working with? And then can you give us some examples of maybe moving a child from where they came to you through better behavior?
One of the clients that I worked with most recently, I saw them almost every day. They were preschool age. When I started service initiation with the family, they had a lot of behaviors that they were concerned about. Self-injurious behavior was one. The kiddo would use an open hand and impact their head.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, that's not safe. So I understood that concern. There was also throwing objects, crying, yelling, that sort of thing. And what made this client particularly special in my mind was that they were not yet using verbal language.
Mm-hmm.
They were non-speaking. And during service initiation, we asked parents if they would like to prioritize speech or if they would like to use a different methodology. Then, and this is a component of a neuroaffirming approach that I can elaborate more on later, we tried a couple different ways for the child to communicate. We used picture icons. There was an application on the tablet that they used called Go Talk Now.
Mm-hmm.
And we tried using sign language,
Yes.
some basic signs, just to see what worked best for the child. We also encouraged the development of vocal speech, but it was more finding what worked best for the child and what they enjoyed using.
Walk me through this process. So we incorporate more options for speech. And
Yes.
were you, as a result of allowing more communication, did some of the behaviors start shifting, or did it require more than just that?
Oh, absolutely. The behavior started shifting.
So a lot of it was linked to the frustration around not being able to communicate?
I suspect so. I suspect that this client just didn't have the skill set necessary to make their needs known.
And so that was a lot of what you worked on specifically was, hey, you can get what you ask for, and then positive reinforcement for that.
Oh, yes. It took a while, too, especially since we were trying a couple of different things. The kiddo was also receiving speech therapy in particular.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a lot of interdisciplinary work, too.
Mm-hmm.
I'll share a brief success story with this particular methodology because the kiddo just took to his iPad, his dictation app, just like that.
Really? You can't see her, but she's got her fingers crossed. Like
yeah,
one and
just
the
like
same.
that.
Yeah, one and the same.
At one of our last sessions together, when the kiddo was starting to expand the words that were on their device, me and the kiddo were working on, hey, if you want a break, could you let me know? Because, of course, we're not just going to work on skills and targets for the entire 2-3 hours.
Right.
Of course, you're going to get a break. It took maybe 2 times of me explaining, hey, I see you have Netflix pulled up. Do you want a break? Could you let me know so I know that's what you're doing? Before, I'm getting chills just telling you about this. Without any prompting from me, the kiddo went into his iPad, went into the Go Talk Now application, and selected I need a break iPad, and then turned on Netflix.
Nice. Just giving them freedom.
I was so excited.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And the freedom, you're giving them independence and freedom. And I know from working with Teal how important that is for her to feel like she's heard, that her voice matters. And when she doesn't have that, she does get more frustrated. I see a lot of behaviors that are linked to her communication. So, like swatting, when she gets really frustrated, she'll do a lot of swatting. And it has gotten better since starting to incorporate some of the more positive feedback for her. But I've also had to say things like, Teal, I really love it when your arms are quiet when you're frustrated. I know sometimes it's easier to just swing your arms around when you're frustrated, but I really want you to try to communicate with me and keep your arms, quiet or still. And so even when she's not frustrated, I will then say to her, Teal, I really love your quiet arms, or I really love how your hands are just on your lap. And so I'm trying to give her feedback for when she's doing it right, when it's not even linked to any type of communication or frustration. What do you think about that? Do I get a gold star?
I love it. I love it. Just because you're using such positive language and explaining what you're looking for and why. I love it.
Yeah. Well, however, the other day, actually just yesterday, she did smack me, and it wasn't a spastic response. It was intentional. And I have been trying to also, one, not raise my voice, because it's hard when you get hit. I mean, I did raise my voice and say, it's not okay to hit. You can't hit. Like, that is not how we deal with our frustration in this family. And I rose my voice. And then what was really, really sad, Katheryn, is she laughed at me. Because she got attention, right? So that's one of your EATS. So she got a response from me, and it wasn't a malicious laugh. She's a very, very sweet child, but it was she got a reaction from me, and it stopped whatever other behavior she was trying to avoid. So I don't know, you can see me, no one can see me right now, but I'm kind of like touching my neck. I'm like, oh, I totally fell into the trap of the child.
I do it too. Nobody's perfect.
Yeah. So when you think about behaviors like that, like hitting, what are other ways that we can interact with a child? And I do know from working with Stephen that 99% of it is me, like controlling the parent, getting the parent to be aware of their behaviors that then influence the child's behavior. What are some of the things that you would suggest that we do when it comes to a physical type of behavior that we're seeing from a child?
Well, I've been hit before. I've had things thrown at me. I've been bitten several times. So it's never pleasant. Never. And it's a reality of this type of work. I think a lot of people might get into working with kids in this field because they enjoy playing with them. And that's not all it is. I think my first suggestion would be, once everyone is in more regulated state, think about what was happening right before that particular behavior happened. Was the child being asked a lot of questions? Do you know how they slept? Do you know if they had a snack recently, if they just came home from school? What sort of circumstances were at play there? If we try to view all behavior as some kind of communication, what might they have been trying to say?
That's a really good reminder for me. I know when Teal gets hangry, I'm like, oh, she doesn't get angry. She gets like weepy and emotional. And I'm like, oh, she's hungry. So it's been good for me to step back and look at that from a hunger standpoint. But I really didn't think about it from, how did she sleep? Or was someone at school not being nice to her? Or did her mom and dad just have a little bit of an irritation and then she's just pulling that through? I mean, there's all sorts of different things to look at, but that's a really good reminder. What happened prior? And what's the environment that's created right before that?
I wish I could also tell basically any parent of a kiddo with special needs that challenging behaviors are not a reflection of whether someone's a good parent at all.
Thank you.
Some kiddos are just wired differently, and it's not a comment on anything you're doing or not doing.
Thank you for that. I think everyone needs to hear that, because people are always judging. You always get the looks. You get the, why is your child screaming in the grocery store? Or why are they flapping or stimming? I mean, a lot of those things, it's very true. And we get judged by society all the time.
I wish there was less of that.
Me too. I mean, and hopefully we're getting there. So I do have a question about cognitive. So, and this is something that I've challenged like Dr. Becky on her podcast, like, hey, can we start talking about children that are cognitively atypical? How do you discipline a child that may be intellectually a little bit behind or may never even get to what standard society would in quotes say, a typical 4-year-old brain or a typical 7-year-old brain, right? How do you work with cognitive impairment and discipline?
That's a great question. And it really caused me to think about and to try to distill some of the key things that I do.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll start by saying that even if there is a cognitive impairment present, if you view all behavior as trying to communicate something, whether the child is neurotypical or not, I think it helps you bring a lot more compassion into the interaction, regardless of what environment you're in. School, home, community, compassion can be practiced anywhere. One thing to keep in mind is that I see a lot of attempts at discipline without explaining why what the child did is wrong, not safe, etc., and B, giving the child an alternative skill to use.
Yeah. And I had a mom on recently who said, Jen, you can't use so many words with certain kids.
Yes.
Teal understands everything that I say. So I can, now it doesn't always change her behavior when we explain to her why that option is not acceptable. But for other children who may be cognitively impaired, you can't use so many words. But I also don't think you can just say no. Hitting isn't, and maybe appropriate is too big of a word. Hitting isn't okay. When you're frustrated in the future or next time you're frustrated, let's try this. I mean, I don't know. I'm ad-libbing right now with you.
No, that's a good idea. And I agree with kiddos. You might need to just use core words. So these would not be words like the, is, things like that.
Right.
It's most likely nouns or verbs.
Right. Yeah, it's true. Because on her talking board, they have the and is and but we very rarely use it. She might say, drink sippy cup juice. I'm like, okay, got it. I know what you want. And so I need to find the things on the board that say no hitting. But she understands when I say it to her, but maybe using another modality. She loves her talking board. So maybe that's a good way for me to then also communicate with her. Like, hey, no hitting. Remember we talked about it's not appropriate behavior. No hitting. And I know her teacher has said to me, get to the feelings page. What are you feeling? Right. So helping her communicate, what are you feeling right now that's causing you to have this behavior?
When she uses that feelings board and she picks how she's feeling, do people around her just say, great job, thanks for telling us how you're feeling?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a lot of encouragement. Even if I don't even if she says random things, even if she's just hitting the board and not even paying attention, I'll respond. I'll be like, oh, really? You want to jump rope right now? Well, we're in the car, Teal. I talk back with her a lot. Okay. So let's go to what are some of the specialties that you have worked within. So, and again, I'm not a fan of labels, but at the same time, I mean, we've got autism, we've got ADHD, we've got Down syndrome. We have, all sorts of different areas of focus. Where do you primarily focus?
I have gotten most of my experience working with young children who have an autism diagnosis.
Okay.
I've worked in the past with clients of all ages who had developmental disabilities, intellectual impairments, whatever terminology that you choose to use, learning disabilities.
So the whole gamut.
Within the field of developmental disabilities, it's been pretty vast.
Okay. So and I forget, when the child runs, there's a word for it within autism.
Elopement.
Yeah. Okay. So when a child is doing that behavior, how would you analyze that? And then how would you possibly change the behavior?
So I am fortunate in that when I was going through coursework for behavior science, I chose that particular behavior for a course project.
Oh, there you go.
So I know that 9 times out of 10, when you think of the 4 functions and you think about them in relation to elopement, sensory probably isn't one of them.
Mm-hmm.
Just according to the research. And frequently, you'll probably find that it's escape or avoidance. So the next question becomes, what are they trying to escape from? And ideally, if you can figure out why, you're off to the races.
Can you give me some examples?
I saw this happen in a school I worked with, and it was really nobody's fault. One of the kiddos in our room had, we call it a low-tech picture exchange board, just a couple laminated sheets of paper with icons on them.
Yeah.
And the person that was working with them held up the binder with the sheets of paper and was trying to figure out what they wanted. Asking a couple questions. Do you want something to eat? Do you want a break? And in response to one question, the kiddo got up out of their chair and ran away from their work area.
Interesting. What was the question?
It's been a couple years. I don't recall the question exactly. I just know that after repeated questioning, the child got up and left.
Where would you go as a therapist in that situation? Like, is it the concept of being asked too many questions? Is it the concept of not having an answer? Is it a concept of not understanding? Talk me through that.
So my first thought was, this kiddo has this picture board to communicate, but on the board itself, there were a lot of pictures. It was maybe like 5 pictures down and 6 across. Very visually busy. Might be a lot to look at. And if each picture stands for something, that's a lot to process.
Especially with a child that's having processing issues.
So even if they knew the answer, what they wanted to communicate, they'd have to scan the grid, look for the picture, take the picture off the Velcro using fine motor skills, and possibly hand it to the teacher.
So just too much.
There's a lot of things that could be hard.
And children don't love hard things. I mean, nobody loves hard things. Hello.
Imagine, too, if you have that page in front of you with all these icons, you might know exactly what you want to say, but you can't find the word for it. I'd be frustrated, too.
So coming back to that situation then, simplification would be huge. I'm assuming a lot of this is brainstorming.
That's exactly it. There are a lot of ideas in this field, and a whole lot of it, I think more than a lot of people realize, is trying things and being creative. That's why I like this science so much, that there's always an answer. You just got to find it.
And you have to have patience enough within the setting, which I think is one of the hardest things for parents, especially. Parents were not always given the patience card. And, and so I think that's really good to remember, is just, it doesn't always come easily to everyone. It is a matter of multiple choice and different scenarios, and being gentle and kind to yourself in the situation and the child in the situation, like you mentioned earlier, with compassion.
And I've had to take a step back myself if I find myself going through these ideas. My first idea doesn't work. My second idea doesn't work. The third one doesn't work. Yes, it's frustrating, but you have to be aware that when you're working one-on-one with a child, they're more attuned to your emotional state than you might think.
Oh my gosh. As you were chatting, I was like, yep, your nervous system goes up and their nervous system goes up. And that goes back to that environment that you started with, is we really want to make sure that everyone's environment is good. So if you're uncomfortable, they're going to be uncomfortable. I mean, it's mirror neurons are pretty amazing. The ability for someone else to sense and feel exactly what's going on in your brain, as well as you doing that to them.
That was a huge thing for me when I was in graduate school, looking into the research on mirror neurons and empathy and perspective taking. I'm still really interested in that.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? Like, that's one thing that we've learned through neuromovement, or the concept of Feldenkrais for children, is Anat Boniel's book talks about mirror neurons. And it was one of the first times that I realized it, is sometimes when we react so positively to a child, it actually prevents those synapses from creating new neural pathways. And so making sure that I feel really positive for Teal, but I don't have to exclaim that response because I want her to understand it, to feel it, to give her brain that chance to put that new neural pathway down. And when we respond too much, like when you said, oh, do people respond positively to her when she hit, I feel frustrated, or I feel scared, or I'm angry, I'm hungry. Yes, we do. But I need to remember to remind people like, hey, give her a moment. And just feeling it is enough because the mirror neurons within teal are going to feel it. And you don't have to have that verbal exclamation point on it. You don't have to. She knows. Well, this has been a really great conversation. A couple of major takeaways. I mean, just making sure that I remember compassion, that we're nice to ourselves and that we're nice to our children. Just be gentle with ourselves. I think that's a huge reminder. I love how you reminded me that behavior of any sort is a form of communication. I love the eats and realizing that there are some ways that you can kind of categorize and then maybe feel a little bit better. And then looking back and saying, what was the precursor to this event and how can we create a better situation moving forward? Are there any other nuggets of information that you want to share before we sign off?
I so enjoyed this conversation. Thank you so much for having me. And if anyone else is interested in learning more about this kind of approach with kiddos, I highly recommend that they look into Dr. Ross Green's work. He has a website called Lives in the Balance. He has his own methodology for working with kiddos. He has a bunch of books. He's one of my professional role models.
We'll put that in the show notes. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us, Katheryn.
I hope I can make a positive difference.
I think you already are. Thank you for your time and have a wonderful day.
You too.
Thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you found one or two meaningful nuggets of information to make your day better. If you think there's value in what we do, please take a moment to tell another friend, family member, or a caregiver. We'd love to hear from you at forourspecialkids@gmail.com. You can send in a question, a comment, a topic that you'd like to learn more about, or if you'd like us to highlight a certain person, please send that information to us. It makes our show so much better and so much more valuable for you. Our Facebook and Instagram handle is For Our Special Kids. And finally, remember to witness the wonder and the wisdom within yourself and others. Until next time.